District of Conservation is sponsored by the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, better known as CFACT. To learn more about our sponsor, head over to cfact.org. Thanks for listening to the program. Welcome to District of Conservation. I'm your host, Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. Welcome to the 500th installment of District of Conservation. To celebrate this occasion, I brought on my friend Jason Isaac, CEO and founder of the American Energy Institute, to talk about what is happening in his purview, perch out in Texas and across the country, especially in Washington, D.C. Jason, thank you so much for joining me on the program today.
It's great to be on. I'm so excited.
For those who are unfamiliar with your work, who might not be as wonky as the two of us, talk about your background, because you have years of legislative experience. You've worked on the energy issue for a very long time. Please introduce yourself and talk about some of the things you accomplished as a member of the Texas legislature and more.
Sure. Yeah, I served for 4 terms last decade in the Texas legislature and the Texas House of Representatives, representing, it started out 3 counties, then we had redistricting 2 counties just outside of the Austin area, in a place called the Hill Country, is this region of Texas as it's known. A lot of hills, a lot of water. It's really pretty central area, central Texas. And so I served for those 8 years and just really, I had a great chief of staff my first couple of terms. Then she went on to be elected to city council in the city of Austin, the only conservative member of the council at that time. Now she's actually a member of the legislature serving with my wife. They came in together a couple of sessions ago. But she told me, like, at one time, because I was working on everything, it's like, oh, I want to work on border security. I want to work on education reform, and I want to work on energy and environment. And I just had all these ideas. And she's like, really slow down. And she taught me really how to be what I thought was an effective legislator. And it was like, Jason, why don't you focus on 1 or 2 areas that you're really passionate about? And become the expert in those in the House, and people will look to you and they will trust you on those particular issues. And I thought energy is so important, and we don't message well on the environment. And so I really kind of spent my 8 years focusing and serving on the Environmental Regulation Committee, our Energy Resources Committee, among others. But those were my really areas of focus during my time in the legislature. And then when I left in 2018, my term ended January 2019. But I went over to work at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, leading an initiative there called Life Powered. It's to raise America's energy IQ, is a short mission statement. We got involved in federal policy, state policy, doing research. And then a couple of years ago, just realized that there was this big void of trade organizations that fight for free markets, that push back on subsidies, that don't get involved in political agendas, that really haven't been co-opted by the left. And I spent a year researching trade organizations and looking at how their boards were set up, and really ideally seeing if there was something that we could partner with. And it just came to this idea came to me. It's like, I think we need to start a new trade organization. And so I stepped aside from the Texas Public Policy Foundation to build a trade organization that represents American energy companies that truly and unabashedly support free markets. They don't want handouts, subsidies, or credits. And they just want to be able to produce energy affordably and reliably. And it's interesting now that some of my board members are okay with me advocating for policies that would actually reduce the cost of energy. They understand the benefit to mankind, and that's more important than self-serving policies that tax the poor, as we're seeing so prevalent now. And so launched that a couple of years ago. It was exciting right after the election. In November, I did an event in Denver at Liberty Energy. Chris Wright and Tricia Curtis, our economist, and I hosted this panel just to kind of do an election recap. And it was exciting because that same week, Liberty Energy joined our trade organization. And 2 days later, Chris Wright gets the nomination to be our Secretary of Energy. So I think quite a testament to some of the work that we're doing and to what we're fighting for and who some of our members are. So it's been a lot of fun the last couple of decades. My service in the legislature, and now continuing to advocate for policies that really help the least among us and lift the rest of the world's poor out of poverty.
I could speak to the great work you're doing seeing what you did at TPPF as well, in addition to your time in the legislature. And now we were introduced by our mutual friend, Mandy Gunasekara, who was my predecessor at Independent Women's Forum. We travel in the same circles, especially for fighting ESG. And you put out a lot of great content, and you were also responsible for a lot of the exposés towards offshore wind as well. And I want to touch upon something that I think people are still harping on, and this obsession with hating carbon. You jokingly call yourself the carbon king. You always extol the benefits of carbon. Carbon is only a fraction of the atmosphere, as everyone knows. And people are losing their minds over the likely repeal, soon to be forthcoming repeal of the endangerment finding from 2009. So could you kind of contextualize, why is there this reviling of carbon, even though it's an essential atom, an essential, component to living and breathing, and why we shouldn't be latching energy policy onto this obsession of carbon?
Yeah, it really is, and it's interesting because you're right. I stood up in front of Congress multiple times, and I think almost every time I testify, I introduce myself and I say, "Hi, I'm Jason Isaac, and I live a high carbon lifestyle." And I think the rest of the world should too. And it was Congressman Raskin and I was actually there with Mandy, testifying with Mandy and Steve Moore. And Congressman Raskin referred to me as the carbon king, and I kind of enjoyed it. And I found my notes recently from that hearing a couple of years ago, and it was the only thing I had written down in my notes were carbon king. And I was like, that's good. I'm a marketing kind of gimmicky guy. It's my license plate. It's on my business cards, my name tags. I have embraced the moniker, which I think he thought was an insult, but I do embrace the high carbon lifestyle, and I wish the rest of the world could get to live one too, because there are no low energy wealthy countries. They just don't exist, and that's really what it's about. But the climate cult, if you will, the left has become, I call it their Kool-Aid, the decarbonization, this fascination with CO2, and as you mentioned, this trace gas that's in the atmosphere that makes up 0.04% of our atmosphere that's necessary for life on Earth. And we see more and more studies coming out recently. There was a study out of Norway that said that man's contributions of greenhouse gases over the last 200 years have had no systemic impact on climate. And there's other research that are saying that the CO2 emissions are increasing on this planet, and it's because the planet is warming. It's not the other way around, and that warming is primarily being driven by the sun. Imagine that. This other thing that gives us life on Earth, the sun. But they realize, in my opinion, what the left has realized, that if you control carbon, you control everything. And so they have demonized it. And every single policy from the left comes back to reducing CO2 emissions, which, if you've run the magic, which I have, and I know others have, I think Heritage even has the magic on their website. And what the magic is it's an acronym that stands for the Model for the Assessment of Greenhouse Gas Induced Climate Change, MAGGICC. And it shows that if you decarbonize certain parts of the world or the entire world, what the temperature change is. This is the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They use magic to justify Paris. Well, decarbonizing the U.S. does nothing to mitigate a changing climate. It just makes everything more expensive. And as Senator Kennedy from Louisiana has said, what does it do? It doesn't do anything. And he was grilling a DOE official a couple of years ago, and the guy wouldn't answer him. And I'm sitting there yelling at the TV, like, I know what it does. It doesn't do anything. It's less than 1/10 of 1 degree over the next 50 years, but it costs $50 trillion to get there and puts everybody in poverty. And I really think that that's this Malthusian attitude of a lot of the climate people on the left. And they don't like to talk about how we produce and we live a high carbon lifestyle. And during the last 50 years, we've reduced pollution, things that in certain concentrations can impact human health. We've reduced that nearly 80% over the last 5 decades. And over that same time frame, we've become number one in access to clean and safe drinking water. It was in the 70s, it was like less than 40% of our municipal water systems met the lowest standards. And today, it's over 90% of our municipal water systems meet the highest standards. This is only possible with access to affordable and and reliable energy. And and you'll probably hear me use that term over and over again, affordable and reliable. And I've caught myself in the past. I'm like, yeah, I'm for all of the above energy policy. It's a lazy way to advocate for energy.
It's
But you
net zero
realize
light.
that yeah, it's net zero light. I published a piece, I think it may have been I don't want to say the publication in case I get it wrong, but I basically alluded to the fact that all of the above is the DEI for energy policy. And I know Steve Malloy just had something published basically making the same argument. It really is. Because then I'm like, well, no, we should be for affordable and reliable because that doesn't include things that don't work. Or it includes things that doesn't, yeah, it doesn't include things that don't work. And all of the above includes things that are heavily subsidized, that can't survive without subsidies. They're dependent on China, and they're destroying vast swaths of habitat to be made. And I think we should leave the smallest environmental footprint when we're producing energy. And the energies that do that are the ones that are really work when we need them to work. It's nuclear, it's oil, it's gas, it's coal. So yeah, it's one of the things that I try to flip people's minds and kind of really give them this eye-opening comment about living the high carbon lifestyle and how we should all do it.
Absolutely. And I think we are starting to see a vibe shift. I hate to use that term because that's what like Gen Zers use, and I'm a millennial. But to borrow their lingo, I believe we are seeing a vibe shift, excuse me. We had seen this in the different ESG conferences we've been going to, kind of our side's response to ESG. Probably with the producers that you deal with in your association, they have probably started to change their tune, or maybe they were never buying into the net zero directives altogether. But we have even seen some of the big conglomerates move away from investing in renewables, so-called renewables, wind and solar, to pivoting back to oil, gas, and coal, and perhaps nuclear for some of them who have a diversified portfolio. Do you start to see that a little bit more of a change in terms of rhetoric? Because it seems to me like that is what is occurring, but we do see some resistance met largely with people on the other side of the aisle, and even some on our side of the aisle too, with this insistence to keep Green New Deal subsidies in the IRA.
Yeah, I think there has been a little bit of a course correction. I had the opportunity when I was at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, was working closely with the Lieutenant Governor's office to craft some legislation. And it was really somebody that's a supporter. They work in the oil and gas space, and they're saying, and I started to hear this over and over again in 2018, 2019. It's like, hey, we're being debanked. We're ESG is impacting us. And I'm like, what is ESG? I didn't know what this was. And I was like, oh, this is energy discrimination. They're discriminating against responsible American energy producers, trying to control your business and debank you, not provide insurance. And so in 2020, I wrote a policy that says if you boycott fossil fuels, you can't do business with the state of Texas, and then worked closely with Lieutenant Governor's office and Senator Brian Birdwell, and then Representative Phil King, he's now a state senator, Phil King, to get this bill passed. It became Senate Bill 13. You can tell by the low number that's a priority from the Lieutenant Governor. And I was shocked in 2021 when we got it passed. I quite honestly thought that this is a big lift. We're never going to be able to pass this because it's really targeted at companies that are divesting coal, like PNB Paribas or BNP Paribas, which owns Bank of the West, which is this bank in the Western United States that really got its start in coal mining, copper mining, gold mining communities in the Rocky Mountains. And then those counties became oil and gas producing counties. And they came out with a statement in 2018 that said, we're no longer going to do business with companies that earn more than 25% of their revenue from the production of hydrocarbons. And I thought, wow, that's just discriminatory. You are just targeting an industry that makes life possible, and that's really not a fiduciary responsible thing to do. And so I really went after those kind of woke companies before the term woke was coined and used heavily, and said, this is what we're going to do. And we got it passed. And now companies like BlackRock are on the boycott list in Texas, and they're being divested billions of dollars because they're using funds from pensioners to manipulate markets. They are acting as a cartel to drive this Paris Climate Accord, this net zero, this decarbonization. Those are political agendas. I've really been trying to kind of ramp up the messaging and amplify the messaging on this to help people understand about Paris commitments. Look at some of the things that Donald Trump has said about Paris. He said the United States will not be held hostage to a globalist environmental agenda that punishes our country while enriching others. He said, under my administration, we've saved American energy from the Paris scam. So he calls it a scam. He calls it a ripoff. And he's right. But when you look at companies out there, especially in the oil and gas space, the large multinational oil and gas producing companies have all committed to Paris with only one exception, and it's a company called Apache that's out of Houston. They have not committed to Paris. And so what happens? BlackRock constantly votes against their board members. It's just unbelievable when you have companies like Exxon and Chevron and Occidental Petroleum and Shell and BP and ConocoPhillips and the list goes on of these oil and gas companies that have committed to their own demise. And yet President Trump just within the last week was in Saudi Arabia, and he's announcing new deals with, I believe, Saudi Aramco, Exxon, and Oxy. And I'm like, why is he helping out these woke companies that have committed to agreements that are hostile towards President's energy dominance, America First agenda? So I'm trying to educate people in Congress and in the White House about how detrimental this is, that we really have got to get these companies to abandon their Paris commitments. It's not the law of the land in the United States. I think it's treasonous that companies are complying to a foreign treaty that, is not the law of the land here in the United States. So some companies are pulling back their investments in so-called renewables, but because there's no cost benefit, or it's all cost and very, very little benefit, if anything. So the cost benefit analysis doesn't work out. It doesn't pencil out. And it's evident in some of their returns. But they're not backing away from their commitments that are ultimately increasing the cost of energy, which increases the cost of everything.
Let's talk about the one big beautiful bill a little bit more, going off of this discussion we're having, Jason, because before we went on the air, we were kind of venting about the frustration, how there's only maybe 60% of cuts to the IRA green credits. And we heard Republicans and the president campaign on repealing the so-called Green New Scam. And the president, I believe, wants to see that happen. I think that's one of the best things to do. There's other debates happening about including other measures that are not really relevant to our discussion right now that could boost cutting the debt and deficit. But I think the best approach to help fund the president's tax cuts, for instance, making them more quasi-permanent, would be close to ideally a full repeal. I don't think we're going to, unfortunately, get a full repeal of the green subsidies because there's hesitation by Republican members who didn't even vote for it, but they claim that there's going to be benefits from these jobs that are promised, even though I've been calculating the numbers. It's well below the projected job creation estimate. It's only 400,000 jobs if we're even able to believe those numbers. Well below the 1 million job per year creation estimate that I think the University of Massachusetts Amherst was forecasting 9 million jobs across the decade of passage. We don't see anything near that. And those jobs could go out the window and not be guaranteed because of market conditions, high interest rates, supply chain issues, possibly tariffs, and other economic conditions that might make these so-called clean energy projects unviable. So I know that I think on Sunday or yesterday or right now, right now, of course, the president is visiting Congress as we speak, as we record. I don't know if he's trying to extract more cuts to the IRA, because the 60% cut without any touching of the uncapped solar and wind subsidies would essentially keep this in perpetuity. And it would be after his time in office in 2029, where we could see hypothetically a Democrat administration come in and say, let's boost these IRA subsidies, uncapped wind and solar, boosting of mature industries that don't need these subsidies anymore. Let's continue that because that's what we believe is right. And so why are Republicans not following through with their pledge here? Because it would save taxpayers $1 trillion if we did see full repeal. It would help unleash reliable energy sources, nuclear and the conventional oil, gas, and coal, and even geothermal. But we even see debate about, keeping subsidies on geothermal and nuclear, which is debatable in itself. But why is there this hesitation? You're talking to members of Congress. I've been engaging members of Congress, too, for my day job. But it just seems like they're not understanding that they can do a lot more.
Yeah, I will tell you, it's awfully tempting. And as someone who has served in a legislative body, the pressure is intense, and the benefits that are sold from these so-called green projects is overwhelming. So they talk about all these jobs and all this investment that it's going to bring in their, in some of these members' rural districts. And so they tout that benefits, and it's really sold as economic development, but you're getting sold a bill of goods. And I can use Texas as a perfect example. Over the last decade, about $140 billion has, and I use the term invest loosely, it's really been wasted. $140 billion has been spent on energy, electric generation here in the state of Texas. Almost all of that is on wind and solar. So $140 billion, that's creating jobs, that's spending money, that money is flowing into communities, and people think that's great. And I've listened to testimony for countless hours this legislative session here in Texas, and people talking about all the money that's being invested into their communities. But the simple fact of the matter is, if only a quarter of that $140 billion, only a quarter of that had been spent on reliable forms of electric generation, Winter Storm Uri would have never happened in Texas. It would have been cold, but there would not have been outages. It just wouldn't have happened. And we wouldn't see the price spikes and the energy emergency alerts that we're seeing today. We've seen two over the last 5 years, but we saw a price spike in Texas just earlier this week when wind was performing at half of what it was forecasted. And only 10% of its installed capacity was generating electricity. Again, that was 50% of what our grid manager was projecting the day before. Imagine if only half of our natural gas fleet showed up, or if only 10% of its installed capacity showed up. We would have massive blackouts. So we're really wasting money. It's like going out to eat. You go grab, some food for now $10 or $15 for a quick lunch, a quick sandwich. Imagine that sandwich costing $1,500. No one would buy it, but just think about the investment it would be. Think about all the jobs that you could create at that restaurant. I mean, how many people they could hire with $1,500. I mean, it's really that level of absurdity, what we're doing when it comes to electric generation. And this is something that Congress needs to understand. Just because there's economic development and investment doesn't mean it's a good use of money. And they really shouldn't allow this negligence to happen, because what's happened in Texas alone over the last 4 years, we've seen a 28% increase in residential electric costs. And so that's hitting residences and small business consumers. It's not hitting the large industrial users. And again, this is something I've just learned in the last few months. The large industrial users, oil and gas companies, big tech, manufacturing, industrial, the companies that want to build data centers, they do power purchase agreements from heavily subsidized wind and solar companies to buy electricity on the cheap. And then the ratepayers, the small businesses, consumers, we're the ones that pick up the cost for the volatility, which is estimated at $2.3 billion just in Texas alone last year. That's being passed on to the least among us. And the big companies aren't absorbing the costs that they're imposing on the grid by so-called investing in wind and solar credits. So that's just something that I wish members of Congress knew and understood, that anytime they subsidize green energy, the so-called green energy, it's just making their constituents pay more for electricity, and they get nothing in return except less reliable electricity that's more likely to go out during peak demand times. So wind and solar have become a complete parasite on our grid. They're eating it from the inside and destroying it, as we saw recently in Spain and Portugal. 1 week, they're bragging about 100% of their electricity coming from renewables. The next week, they're in a days-long blackout because they're over-dependent on things that don't work.
It's absolutely true. And NERC just put out their summer reliability report and warned that adding solar and battery to the grid in particular, especially if there are no replacements or reliable sources, could invite even more power outages. So the different operators, grid operators across the country, have been warning that because of rising electricity demand from AI and other projects, that there would be no way for renewable sources, so to speak, to meet this growing electricity demand. And especially with and I think they also warned against the premature closure of nuclear and natural gas plants and even coal plants too, saying that that's going to contribute from the Biden era with all the different closures that were occurring through that. So we could be in a cruel renewable summer with all this addition of unreliable energy. I just had, Jason, you'll find this laughable. I am under Dominion energy coverage. So Dominion is my main grid operator here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I had in the last week 3 power outages, one lasting for a couple hours yesterday. And primarily we're sourced by natural gas, nuclear, and renewables account for very little. But all across the country, even if it's like a negligible addition, what we start to see when the grids start to add unreliables like solar and wind, it invites these outages. And I am increasingly seeing that here in Virginia. And there's this debate about, awarding this amount of money to solar credits and what have you for your personal benefit. And they've been targeting people here in my neighborhood and in my area a lot to get people to convert to rooftop solar, which is very expensive and not very reliable. And so I've had 3 power outages in the last week because the grid is starting to add more and more unreliable renewables. And this is going to happen all across the country, probably in bigger scale than even kind of the example I'm citing for myself. But it's very inconvenient, especially with these aging grids being replaced or having sources that are replacing the reliable stuff and putting this intermittent, unreliable, non-dispatchable source that could invite some of these outages in the summer. And that'd be terrible to see.
Yeah, it's really bad. And I'd be very cautious. And I'll warn people that are considering rooftop solar, just keep in mind if the company that manages the rooftop solar goes out of business, you're stuck with solar panels that you still have to pay for 20 years or more, depending on how long you finance those out. I've seen countless horror stories around the country of people getting stuck with rooftop solar that was never connected. The company went bankrupt. And now they have this finance agreement where they have to pay for the panels, even though they're not producing any electricity. They're sold a bill of goods about how this is going to lower their cost of electricity. They're going to come out ahead every single month. Well, when they don't work and the company goes broke and belly up, you're stuck with that. And it's like parking a car on your roof that you have to continue to pay for that you can't use. So I'd be very wary of that. But it adds variability to the grid. And this is what you see. What we're seeing now is as we add more solar, as we add more wind, when the wind blows strong, you have to turn back natural gas. You've got to derate the coal. Nuclear just stays flatline. It's great baseload. We need a lot more nuclear to meet baseload requirements, baseload needs. But this ramping up and ramping down of thermal generation from natural gas and coal is putting wear and tear on that equipment that's used to running pretty steadily, except for peak demand times when it's easy for it to ramp up and ramp down. But now, through several times throughout the day, they're losing money. And this production tax credit that wind and solar receive, that they've been receiving now for over 40 years. They're saying, this is great to help an industry get off of its feet in its infancy. Well, I don't know many 40-year-old infants. I know people that act like infants at 40, but it's an absolute travesty and abuse of our taxpayer dollars. And all we're seeing around the country is more expensive electricity. There's a group that's part of a lawsuit called the 200, probably don't ideologically align with us. The 200 is over 200 civil rights organizations in California that are suing the state of California, saying that their policies violate the Civil Rights Act. The California Air Resources Board has implemented such environmentally strict policies that it's increasing the cost of transportation, it's increased the cost of housing, it's increasing the cost of everything. And so they're suing and saying that you're violating the Civil Rights Act, that your policies have a disparate impact on communities of color. And they're right. The electricity disconnects that we're seeing around the country. I know from 2022 to 2023, there was a 30% increase in people that were losing their electricity, that were getting disconnected, not disconnect notices. I actually had a chance to talk with Pete Hegseth about this on Fox before he went over to the DOD. And he was like, wait a second, what are disconnects? And I said, these are people that are actually getting their electricity disconnected, getting turned off. His mind was blown. It's a 30% increase in electricity from 2022 to 2023, 76% increase in people losing natural gas at their homes. This is what expensive energy does. It hurts the poor, it hurts the least among us more than anyone else. But it's 5 million people over that 1 year in increase. That's what expensive energy does. That's what wind and solar do. They say they're cheaper, but everywhere they've been implemented. This is what the left says, and the lobbyists for the wind and solar industry, which are vast. There are hundreds, if not thousands of them around the country. They say wind and solar is saving people millions and billions of dollars. If that's the case, then how come everywhere it's being implemented, costs are going up and they're going up astronomically and crushing the least among us? So we really need to reverse this. We need to free the parasite from our grid. If people want to do it on their own and not connect to the grid, that's great. But the fact that it's connected to the grid is really destroying the grids around the country.
It is. And if it was viable in the market, we would be seeing that now, and we'd see even more adoption of it in the electricity grid, in the grid mix. Wind only accounts for like 10.2%, and then solar is 3.9 across decades of being subsidized. So you would think there'd be more adoption, but it's not because of, just like you said, this intermittency that has been introduced. People have had to go back to coal, natural gas, and nuclear. And we're going to see more shoring up of those because coal and natural gas together is 60% of electricity generation. People recognize because of AI, you can't prematurely shut down reliable power plants. It would be a travesty to do that, especially when the replacements are inadequate and consume lots of land. And as we start to round out our conversation, Jason, what else would you like to add that we haven't already discussed? Or where would you like to send people to follow your organization, your efforts, and connect with you?
Yeah, you can learn more about our work at at AmericanEnergyInstitute.com. I'm on X at Isaac4Energy. Check us out, give us likes, follows, look at some of our research. It was one of the things that I was posting on X about was EV subsidies. The congressman has said, he's talking about the $7,500 tax credit and how they're trying to get rid of this in the one big, beautiful bill. That's not the only subsidy the electric vehicles receive. We've published research just in the last month on this. It's nearly $95,000 per EV sold through 2023 in benefits and resources that they receive, subsidies that they receive from taxpayers, from electric ratepayers, and purchasers of internal combustion engines. I hope they do work to scale back the corporate average fuel economy because they give electric vehicles a fake multiplier. That's something that I would hope maybe the left would embrace, because you look at the third quarter of 2024 and Tesla received almost $600 million in sales of EV. Basically, they're selling their corporate average fuel economy credits to other automobile manufacturers so they can artificially inflate their numbers. They're not actually improving fuel economy anywhere because they've given an illegal multiplier to electric vehicles that allows Tesla to then rake in billions of dollars every year. But in one quarter alone, it was almost $600 million in revenue to Tesla. Tesla is just barely profitable without these credits. But with these credits, they're immensely profitable. So maybe that you would think the left would kind of embrace some of these ideas to get rid of the credits that are just costing you and I more money. They're not doing anything to improve fuel economy. So we've got that research on our website. But you're so right about the habitat, the loss of habitat. To produce an equivalent amount of electricity, wind takes 75 times the amount of land. And there are people that say, oh, yeah, well, you can still use some of the land below the wind. It's interesting because more and more studies are coming out talking about animals don't want to graze below wind. There's issues with the soil and the amount of lube that's leaking from wind turbines. But solar, you really can't do a whole lot with the land that's under solar panels. It's going to heat up 5 degrees, by the way, but it takes up 25 times more land than natural gas or nuclear to produce an equivalent amount of electricity. And that's only when the sun is shining. So it's just simple facts like this that I wish people understood and would educate their members of Congress. But ultimately, I think we both agree we need to get rid of the subsidies if we're going to help reduce the cost of energy and launch President Trump's energy dominance agenda.
And that's especially true, Jason, because I'm looking at Axios's Twitter X post that they just revealed that electricity demand is going to rise 78% by 2050. And we know that wind and solar will not be adequate or even required or necessary to help meet this demand. So everyone is warning what we've been talking about. And hopefully, a lot of people debate whether or not there's morality to AI data centers. Is it going to occupy a lot of land? Is it really productive? But AI accidentally or inadvertently made our case for reliable, abundant, secure energy and really exposed how vulnerable wind and solar are. So that's one benefit I see to AI being introduced in this mix. But you're absolutely correct. I will encourage everyone to follow all that you're doing, read your reports, connect with you on social media. It's been a pleasure, Jason. I hope we can revisit maybe on a quarterly basis. You can update me what's happening in Texas and beyond. But really appreciate you coming on to talk about all this. And hopefully we'll have some more cuts to the IRA green subsidies.
Let's hope so. One can only hope. Gabby, congratulations on the 500th episode. You're doing incredible work, and it's been great to get to know you over these last few years, and look forward to continuing to talk and fight for affordable and reliable energy.
If you enjoyed this installment of District of Conservation, I would love to know your feedback. Send it my way. Please be sure to leave us reviews on Apple, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are played, and also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to never miss a beat nor a guest announcement. Thanks so much for listening to District of Conservation. I hope you have a wonderful day, and please share the podcast to those who may be interested in learning more about these critical natural resources, environment, energy issues.